This is a CBS News special report. I'm Carissa Lawson in New York.
In recent history, there's been one military operation that stands out for its sheer audacity, but also for its disastrous consequences. In the open waters of the Pacific, the Colombian Navy launched what was intended to be a daring attack on an American aircraft carrier, one of the most formidable warships in the world. But what happened next wasn't a story of triumph, but rather a lesson in the staggering gap between modern military power and traditional tactics. This attack, despite its boldness, would end in failure, leaving Colombia to rethink its approach to naval warfare. In this video, we'll dive deep into the details of that operation, a collision of outdated strategy against cutting-edge technology. Imagine this. The Colombian fleet, armed with outdated warships, launches an attack on a vessel that is the epitome of naval warfare, capable of projecting power and control over vast distances. The Colombian Navy's fleet, outgunned and underprepared, made its move, hoping to disrupt the immense American force with an overwhelming surprise attack. But did they stand a chance? From the beginning, the operation was destined for failure. The Colombian ships, though determined, had one major flaw. They were no match for the American carrier's technological superiority. While the Colombian fleet relied on traditional naval tactics, the U.S. aircraft carrier battle group relied on advanced radar systems, long-range missiles, and a level of coordination and firepower that made the Colombian fleet look hopelessly outclassed. The Colombians, unaware of just how sophisticated the American defense systems were, underestimated their enemy, setting the stage for a disastrous confrontation. As the attack unfolded, Colombia's hopes of breaking through the American defenses quickly evaporated. Each maneuver was met with swift retaliation. The Colombian ships were easy targets for the highly advanced systems aboard the U.S. warships, and despite their best efforts, the Colombians couldn't get close enough to launch a meaningful strike. What should have been a well-executed assault turned into a tactical nightmare, with the Colombian fleet suffering significant losses. The aftermath of this failed operation is a reminder of the growing divide between traditional naval forces and the technological might of modern military power. The Colombian Navy suffered heavy casualties, losing valuable ships and equipment, not to mention the cost of the operation itself. What was once seen as a potential victory became a costly lesson in the importance of innovation and technology in modern warfare. But what can we learn from this? How did such a bold plan turn into such a catastrophic failure? And more importantly, what lessons can smaller naval forces like Colombia's take away from this encounter with a military powerhouse like the United States? Today, we'll not only look at the mistakes made by Colombia, but also analyze the critical difference in military strategies, the risks of underestimating technological advances, and the harsh reality that even the most daring plans can fail when the tools at your disposal simply aren't enough. Stay tuned, because what follows will challenge everything you thought you knew about naval warfare, technology, and the fine line between boldness and recklessness. This is not just a story about one failed attack, it's a story about the future of warfare itself. In the early months of 2025, tensions between Colombia and the United States reached a boiling point. For years, the Colombian government had been struggling to assert its presence and power in the region, especially in light of increasing instability in neighboring Venezuela and mounting pressure from global superpowers. The Colombian Navy, eager to prove its strength and capabilities, decided to launch an ambitious military operation that would capture the attention of the world. The target was an American aircraft carrier, a symbol of the U.S. military's unrivaled dominance on the seas. The operation, known as Operation Iron Fist, was billed as a daring attack to challenge the might of one of the most powerful military forces in the world. The Colombian government believed that the operation could be the turning point in their military history, a moment where their naval forces would make a statement to both regional rivals and the global stage. However, the reality of the mission was far from what the planners had envisioned. The Colombian Navy, though increasingly modernized, was still far behind in terms of technological advancements when compared to the U.S. Navy. This glaring disadvantage would become painfully apparent as the operation unfolded. The attack was set into motion from the port of Cartagena, with a small but determined fleet of Colombian warships, led by the flagship destroyer Admiral Cordoba. The fleet also included a pair of older frigates and several smaller support vessels, all armed with basic surface-to-air missiles and torpedoes. Their mission was clear: penetrate the defense perimeter of the American aircraft carrier, USS Nimitz, and launch a surprise missile strike that could cripple its offensive capabilities. The Colombian Navy had conducted extensive training exercises leading up to the operation, and while the fleet lacked advanced missile technology, they had hope in the element of surprise. Unknown to the Colombians, the U.S. Navy had already anticipated the possibility of such an attack. The USS Nimitz was part of a highly fortified carrier strike group that included multiple destroyers, submarines, and surveillance vessels equipped with cutting-edge radar systems. The Nimitz itself had undergone extensive upgrades, with its state-of-the-art radar systems capable of detecting even the smallest threats from hundreds of miles away. The U.S. Navy had also recently deployed a new class of anti-missile defense systems, making it nearly impenetrable to anything less than a full-scale assault. As the Colombian fleet advanced toward the target, the Nimitz's sensors picked up the incoming ships long before they were within striking range. Within moments, the American fleet activated its defense systems, positioning its destroyers in a defensive formation around the carrier. The Colombian fleet had underestimated the speed and agility of the American vessels, which maneuvered with incredible precision to close any gaps in their defense perimeter. The Colombians, hoping that their radar jamming equipment would provide them an edge, soon realized that their systems were no match for the Nimitz's advanced countermeasures. In a desperate attempt to make their strike count, the Colombian ships launched several surface-to-air missiles at the Nimitz, hoping to overwhelm the U.S. defense systems. However, the American fleet's countermeasures were swift and unforgiving. The surface-to-air missiles were intercepted and destroyed before they could come within range of the carrier. The Colombian ships, now exposed, were left vulnerable to the retaliatory strike that was already in motion. The USS Nimitz deployed its own missile strikes, aimed at the heart of the Colombian fleet. Within minutes, the flagship Admiral Cordoba was struck by a precise missile, crippling its engines and sending it into a rapid descent into the waters below. The other Colombian ships, lacking the maneuverability and advanced countermeasures to evade the incoming missiles, soon followed suit. The result was a total collapse of the operation. What had begun as a bold challenge to U.S. naval supremacy ended in disaster, with the Colombian fleet suffering catastrophic losses. The Colombian government, shocked by the failure, quickly faced public outcry and international condemnation. The mission that had been hailed as the country's moment of military glory was instead a humiliating defeat, one that would haunt the Colombian Navy for years to come. The attack on the USS Nimitz became a textbook example of the dangers of underestimating the technological capabilities of modern military forces. The Colombian Navy's traditional methods of naval warfare, though effective in regional skirmishes, proved to be woefully inadequate against the advanced technologies employed by the United States. What was once considered a bold strike for national pride was, in the end, a painful reminder of the growing divide between conventional naval power and the futuristic capabilities of modern military forces. In the months leading up to the operation, the Colombian Navy meticulously crafted a plan to strike at the heart of American naval power. The strategy was built around one central idea: surprise. The Colombian planners believed that by launching a sudden and overwhelming attack, they could catch the American carrier strike group off guard and inflict significant damage before U.S. forces had a chance to react. The operation, codenamed Operation Iron Fist, was designed to rely on speed, stealth, and the element of surprise, capitalizing on the perception that the U.S. Navy's defense systems were not impervious to unconventional tactics. The Colombian Navy's fleet was led by the flagship destroyer Admiral Cordoba, a relatively modern warship armed with a combination of surface-to-air missiles, torpedoes, and limited anti-ship missile capabilities. While the Admiral Cordoba was considered one of the most advanced ships in Colombia's fleet, it was still decades behind the technology aboard the American carriers. Despite this disparity, The Colombian commanders believed that their fleet could exploit gaps in the American carrier strike group's defense by approaching from unexpected directions and striking with unconventional tactics. To achieve this, the Colombian Navy relied on the use of stealthy nighttime maneuvers and electronic warfare to jam U.S. radar and confuse the defense systems. The Colombian plan hinged on a few key elements. First, the fleet would approach under the cover of darkness, hoping that the American strike group would underestimate the threat. To further enhance their chances, they planned to utilize electronic warfare systems to disrupt U.S. radar signals and temporarily blind the American fleet's sensors. By doing so, the Colombian Navy hoped to create confusion and prevent the USS Nimitz from detecting the incoming assault until it was too late. Once within range, the Colombian Navy's destroyers and frigates were expected to launch a coordinated missile strike. The assumption was that, by launching several missiles in rapid succession from multiple directions, they would be able to overwhelm the American defenses. The Colombian fleet had spent months rehearsing this tactic, practicing missile launches in simulations designed to mimic the conditions of the real operation. However, the technology they used for these simulations was rudimentary at best. The missile systems on the Colombian warships had a much smaller range and were less accurate than those used by the U.S. Navy, which relied on advanced targeting systems to lock onto targets with pinpoint precision. The attack was designed to exploit the weaknesses of the U.S. Navy's defensive perimeter. The Colombians believed that, by launching their attack in multiple waves, they could push through any gaps in the American defenses and deal a decisive blow to the aircraft carrier. But the planners overlooked one crucial aspect. The advanced systems aboard the USS Nimitz and its accompanying strike group were designed specifically to deal with such threats. The Nimitz was equipped with an array of defense mechanisms, including advanced radar systems, anti-missile technology, and a large number of escort ships armed with their own missile systems. The Colombian fleet had no way of knowing the full scope of these defenses, and they were woefully unprepared for the sophistication of the American response. In the days before the operation, the Colombian fleet practiced its maneuvers near the coast of Colombia, hoping to refine their tactics and iron out any flaws in their approach. The Colombian Navy also conducted several mock attacks on simulated targets using decoys and electronic warfare. However, these exercises did not take into account the complexities of engaging a fully operational U.S. carrier strike group. The Colombians were confident that their use of stealth tactics and the element of surprise would be enough to tilt the odds in their favor. But they failed to consider how quickly the American fleet could respond to an imminent threat. The operation began with a sense of optimism and hope. The fleet left the port of Cartagena at night, with the hopes of evading detection as they made their way toward the USS Nimitz. The Colombian commanders believed that, if everything went according to plan, they would be able to strike the carrier before the U.S. Navy even realized they were there. But as they closed in on the target, reality began to set in. The Colombian fleet's radar jamming systems were only partially effective, and the American fleet's advanced sensors easily countered the interference. The Colombians found themselves in a race against time, with their missiles locked and ready to fire but no clear way of getting past the wall of American defenses. What followed was a series of frantic maneuvers as the Colombian ships attempted to close the gap and launch their attack. The U.S. Navy, however, was already well aware of their presence. The USS Nimitz and its accompanying vessels swiftly adjusted their positions, closing the gaps in their defensive formation and preparing to neutralize the incoming threat. The Colombian Navy had placed their hopes in a well-timed and coordinated strike, but it quickly became evident that they had underestimated the technological edge of their adversary. The operation was unfolding with terrifying speed, and the Colombian fleet, despite its best efforts, was already seeing the limitations of its strategies. The USS Nimitz had already detected the Colombian fleet's approach, and its defense systems were quickly activated. The American aircraft carrier, one of the most powerful vessels in the world, was surrounded by a formidable array of defense mechanisms designed to thwart any potential attack. The Nimitz and its accompanying battle group of destroyers, frigates, and submarines formed an impenetrable shield of advanced technology that no one had fully understood. not even the Colombian planners who believed they could succeed. The first sign of failure for the Colombian Navy came almost immediately after their initial missile launch. As the fleet closed in and fired its first volley of missiles, the Colombian destroyers Admiral Cordoba and Vice Admiral Vargas were caught off guard. They had expected to surprise the American fleet, but the USS Nimitz had already initiated a series of countermeasures. The Nimitz's radar and missile defense systems, designed to detect incoming threats from hundreds of miles away, locked onto the incoming missiles with eerie precision. The Colombian missiles, launched with the hope of overwhelming the defenses with sheer volume, were intercepted long before they reached their target. The Nimitz's Aegis combat system, an integrated air and missile defense system, began tracking the incoming threats, and the American fleet's powerful Standard missiles and Sea Sparrow systems swiftly neutralized the Colombian projectiles. In a flash, the first wave of the attack was rendered ineffective. The Colombians, still hopeful, launched a second wave of missiles, but this time they were more cautious. They attempted to scatter their launch points, hoping to exploit any potential weaknesses in the American formation. Unfortunately, their attempts were again futile. The Nimitz's radar systems had already locked onto the positions of the Colombian warships, and the American fleet's retaliation was swift and deadly. At this point, the battle shifted decisively in favor of the United States. The Colombian ships, having expended much of their missile payload, were left with few options. The USS Nimitz deployed its own counterstrike almost immediately, launching Tomahawk cruise missiles from its own arsenal, which were capable of hitting targets with incredible accuracy. As these missiles descended toward their targets, the Colombian Navy found itself unable to mount an effective defense. The Admiral Cordoba was struck first, its hull pierced by a direct hit. The ship's engines were damaged beyond repair, and it quickly began to list, making it impossible for the remaining Colombian ships to regroup or continue the attack. The Vice Admiral Vargas wasn't far behind. Within minutes, both Colombian vessels were reduced to smoldering wrecks in the water, their crews scrambling to abandon ship. The losses didn't stop there. The Colombian fleet, now scattered and disoriented, attempted to disengage, but it was already too late. American submarines, lurking beneath the surface, locked onto the remaining Colombian ships. The USS Toledo, a nuclear-powered attack submarine, unleashed a series of torpedoes that ripped through the hull of a Colombian frigate, the Caldini. The blast sent the frigate tumbling into the depths of the ocean, taking with it valuable crew members and cutting off the last line of defense for Colombia. At this point, the operation had turned into a full-scale rout, and the Colombians had no choice but to retreat. The American response was not merely a show of superior technology. It was also a display of strategic mastery. The coordination between the USS Nimitz and its escorts was flawless. The Nimitz's ability to track incoming threats from such a distance, combined with the speed at which the American fleet could launch countermeasures, was a testament to the immense technological gap between the two forces. While the Colombians had relied on a strategy that could have worked in a different context, it was no match for the relentless, methodical power of the American military. In the aftermath of the operation, Colombia suffered significant losses. The fleet had been decimated, with the Admiral Cordoba and Vice Admiral Vargas both sinking, and the Caldini joining them at the bottom of the ocean. The Colombian Navy was forced to return to port, its morale shattered and its military capabilities severely depleted. The damage wasn't just physical. The political fallout from the failed attack was immense. The Colombian government faced widespread criticism from both domestic and international sources for underestimating the technological power of the United States and sending its fleet into an operation it had no hope of winning. The financial cost was equally staggering. The loss of the ships, personnel, and equipment was estimated to be in the billions, and the Colombian Navy would take years to recover, both in terms of resources and international credibility. The failure of Operation Iron Fist served as a brutal reminder of the risks of engaging in military operations against a technologically superior adversary. The Colombian Navy, once confident in its abilities and the strength of its plans, now faced a harsh reality. Traditional naval tactics, even when executed with precision, were no match for the overwhelming technological superiority of the U.S. Military. The attack had been bold, yes, but it had also been misguided. The Colombians had failed to appreciate just how advanced the U.S. Navy's defense systems had become, and they had overestimated their own capabilities in the face of that overwhelming technological edge. In the end, the operation was a humiliating defeat for Colombia. The attack on the USS Nimitz was a stark reminder of the dangers of confronting a military powerhouse without understanding the full scope of their technological superiority. Colombia had made a grave miscalculation, and the consequences were devastating. The aftermath of Operation Iron Fist left the Colombian Navy in ruins, and the lessons learned would be felt for years to come. For smaller nations seeking to challenge larger military powers, the cost of underestimating their adversary could not have been clearer. Technology, in this modern era of warfare, was not just an advantage, it was a decisive factor in determining the outcome of battle. And for Colombia, the price of their failure was steep. The aftermath of Operation Iron Fist was a bitter pill for the Colombian Navy to swallow. What had begun as a bold attempt to challenge one of the most powerful naval forces in the world had quickly turned into an embarrassing defeat. The consequences of the operation extended far beyond the loss of ships and lives. They resonated throughout the Colombian government and military, forcing a complete re-evaluation of the country's defense strategy. The lessons from the failed attack on the USS Nimitz were harsh and undeniable. Colombia's military leadership had to confront the stark reality that traditional naval tactics and outdated technologies were no match for modern high-tech warfare. The first lesson, and perhaps the most painful, was the overwhelming superiority of U.S. military technology. The Colombian Navy had relied on outdated radar systems and missile technology that simply couldn't compete with the advanced countermeasures of the U.S. fleet. The USS Nimitz's Aegis combat system, designed to track and destroy incoming missiles with pinpoint accuracy, proved to be a nearly impenetrable defense against the Colombian assault. The Nimitz's radar systems were capable of detecting threats hundreds of miles away, giving the American fleet more than enough time to respond and neutralize the incoming missiles before they ever reached their target. For Colombia, this was a stark reminder of the technological gap between them and the U.S. military, a gap that could not be closed with conventional naval strategies. Secondly, the operation revealed the dangers of underestimating an adversary's capabilities. The Colombian fleet had approached the mission with an overconfidence in their tactics, assuming that their surprise attack and sheer determination would be enough to overwhelm the U.S. defenses. The American military's ability to coordinate a rapid and precise response to the Colombian threat showed the importance of not only advanced technology, but also superior training and experience. The U.S. Navy's ability to launch countermeasures in real time and retaliate with deadly precision left little room for error on the part of the Colombian fleet. Furthermore, the failure of Operation Iron Fist highlighted the importance of intelligence and reconnaissance in modern warfare. The Colombian Navy had operated under the assumption that they could surprise the American fleet, but the U.S. Navy had already anticipated potential threats and prepared accordingly. The USS Nimitz had been conducting regular surveillance and intelligence gathering in the region, ensuring that its strike group was always ready to counter any attack. This level of preparedness was a result of years of experience and superior intelligence capabilities, something the Colombian Navy had simply not considered in their planning. The economic cost of the operation was another harsh lesson for Colombia. The loss of several valuable warships, including the Admiral Cordoba, Vice Admiral Vargas, and Caldini, was catastrophic. The price tag for the operation, which had originally been viewed as an investment in national pride, was now seen as a colossal waste of resources. The Colombian government found itself in a difficult position, as the loss of these ships would take years to replace, and the financial burden of rebuilding the fleet was enormous. The military budget, already stretched thin, would need to be reallocated to repair the damage and improve defense capabilities, leaving little room for other national priorities. In the political sphere, the failure of the attack had far-reaching consequences. The Colombian government faced immense pressure from both domestic and international communities to explain the botched operation. The public's trust in the military took a significant hit, with many questioning the leadership's decision to take such a reckless risk against a far superior force. Internationally, Colombia's reputation was tarnished, and the country was seen as a less credible military power. Relations with neighboring countries and even allies were strained as a result of the failed attack. Looking forward, Colombia had no choice but to rebuild, both militarily and politically. The lessons learned from Operation Iron Fist would undoubtedly shape the future of Colombian military doctrine. The first priority would be the modernization of the fleet, with an emphasis on acquiring more advanced technology and improving defense systems. This would require significant investment in research and development, as well as partnerships with more technologically advanced nations. Additionally, the Colombian Navy would need to adopt new strategies that incorporated the realities of modern warfare. Strategies that emphasized intelligence, coordination, and technological innovation over outdated tactics. Finally, the government and military would need to focus on rebuilding public trust and restoring Colombia's international reputation. This could involve greater transparency in military planning, along with efforts to engage in joint military exercises and peacekeeping missions with international partners. By showing a commitment to learning from past mistakes and adapting to the new realities of warfare, Colombia could regain its standing as a reliable and capable military force in the region. Operation Iron Fist may have been a failure, but it was also a wake-up call, one that could serve as the foundation for a more modern, resilient Colombian military. The lessons learned from the disastrous attack on the USS Nimitz were harsh, but they were also necessary for the country to evolve and adapt in an increasingly complex and technologically driven world of warfare.